Welcome to today's deep dive. We're diving into a classic, Trading Places.
Oh, yeah.
The hilarious 80s movie with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. But today we're going beyond the laughs. We're looking at a movie review that argues Trading Places is actually a brilliant social satire.
That's right. To really understand that, I think we need to kind of unpack what social satire even is. It's not just making fun of things. It's using humor to expose deeper issues in society, inequality, hypocrisy. And this film does that by setting up this wild situation where a rich guy and a street hustler literally trade places.
Okay, so you have Louis Winthorpe III,
right?
This privileged commodities broker living the high life. And then you have Ray Valentine hustling just to get by. And it's all because this cruel bet between these millionaire brothers, their lives get totally flipped.
Exactly. And the film uses this almost absurd premise to make us question what actually leads to success in our society. Is it hard work, talent, or just plain luck of being born into the right family?
It's like the movie is running a social experiment, right? But instead of scientists, we have Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd delivering both the laughs and some serious food for thought. And speaking of the actors, this review raves about the cast. I mean, this was Eddie Murphy's breakout role, and you can see why.
Oh, yeah. He's brilliant as Ray Valentine. He brings this incredible charisma and depth to a character who could have easily been a stereotype. And what always strikes me is how Murphy makes us root for Ray, even when he's pulling off some pretty outlandish schemes.
Right. You can't help but cheer for him as he outsmarts the establishment. And then there's Dan Aykroyd as Louis Winthorpe III. Talk about a transformation. He goes from this uptight snob to someone you almost feel sorry for.
It's a hilarious downfall, but it's also played with a lot of heart. And the review points out how Aykroyd manages to make Louis' transformation both funny and believable. We see him lose everything, but we also see him start to question the values he once held.
Yeah, it's not just slapstick humor. There are moments where you genuinely empathize with Louis. And then, of course, we have Jamie Lee Curtis as Ophelia. She helps Winthorpe navigate this whole new world he's been thrown into.
Ophelia is such a key character, and the review highlights how she adds this crucial emotional layer to the film. She's smart, resourceful, and definitely not just there as a love interest.
She's the one who sees the good in Louis, even when he can't see it himself. But of course, you can't have a good story without some truly great villains. And the Duke brothers, man, they are something else.
They're almost cartoonishly evil, right? Obsessed with money and willing to manipulate anyone to win their bet. But, as the review points out, they also represent a very real critique of the elite, and their often callous disregard for those they consider beneath them.
It's like they're a caricature of the worst aspects of wealth and privilege. But let's move beyond the characters for a second and talk about how the movie actually looks. The review really dives into the cinematography, and one thing that jumps out is the stark contrast between the world of the wealthy and the streets of Philadelphia.
Absolutely. On one hand, you have these opulent mansions, luxurious offices, everything dripping with wealth. And then you have the gritty reality of poverty, rundown neighborhoods, people struggling to make ends meet. And the film doesn't shy away from showing us both sides.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The film uses Christmas imagery throughout. Think lavishly decorated trees, twinkling lights, festive cheer. But it often juxtaposes these images with scenes of hardship and even homelessness.
That's such a clever technique. And the review argues that this juxtaposition highlights the film's social satire. It's as if the filmmakers are saying, look at all this holiday cheer, but don't forget about those who are struggling, even during a season that's supposed to be about joy and generosity.
You know, it's like a visual reminder that inequality doesn't take a holiday.
And speaking of unexpected things, can you guess what kind of music the film uses to score this wild ride?
This might surprise you, but they use Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro, a classical opera in a comedy about two guys whose lives get turned upside down.
I know, right. It's a choice that initially seems totally out of place. But when I read what the review had to say about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. The use of this highbrow music actually enhances the film's irony and satire. It adds this layer of absurdity that makes you question everything you're seeing and hearing.
Exactly. It's like the filmmakers are playing with our expectations. They're using Mozart to underscore the absurdity of the situation and the contrast between the characters' backgrounds and their newfound realities. It's a brilliant way to make us think about the film's themes on a deeper level.
It's like they're saying, this isn't just a silly comedy. Pay attention. There's something deeper going on here. And speaking of deeper meaning, one of the things this review really digs into is the whole stock market climax of the film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's such a well-crafted scene. The tension just builds and builds as all these different schemes come to a head. And then, of course, there's that brilliant comedic payoff that leaves you both laughing and cheering for the underdogs.
Exactly. It's a masterclass in how to blend suspense with humor. But here's where the film really goes beyond just entertainment. The review points out that Trading Places, for all its comedic brilliance, actually reflects some very real anxieties people were feeling back in the 1980s.
That's right. The 1980s were a time of big economic shifts. There was a recession, rising unemployment, and a growing gap between the wealthy and everyone else. And these anxieties are woven into the fabric of the film.
So it's not just a random comedy about guys switching lives. It's actually tapping into something deeper about the anxieties of that era.
Absolutely. And that raises an interesting question for us today. Does this movie still hold up in our current world? Have things changed that much? Or are those themes of wealth inequality and systemic injustice even more relevant now? I don't know. What do you think?
It definitely makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, we're still grappling with many of the same issues. But before we dive too deep into that, I wanted to go back to something the review mentioned about the director, John Landis. He's known for his comedies, but this review argues that he's a master at blending humor with social commentary.
Oh, I completely agree. What's so brilliant about Landis's approach is that he doesn't hit you over the head with a message. He weaves those deeper themes into the humor, so it's entertaining and thought-provoking at the same time.
It's like he understands that sometimes laughter is the best way to get people thinking about serious issues. You're more open to considering different perspectives when you're enjoying yourself.
Exactly. He disarms you with the humor, and then bam, he slips in this insightful observation about class or race or the whole system. It's a really effective technique. And the review points out how this approach has had a lasting impact. Trading Places wasn't just a hit back in '83. It sparked conversations that are still relevant today.
It's amazing to think about that. A movie that, on the surface, is about mistaken identities and slapstick humor can have such depth and lasting power.
That's the beauty of film, isn't it? It can transport us, make us laugh, make us think, and sometimes even challenge our perspectives.
You know, as much as the review praises the film's timelessness, it also doesn't shy away from some of its, shall we say, less timeless aspects.
You're right. We've talked about the film's strengths, but it's also important to acknowledge that not everything has aged gracefully.
Yeah. The review specifically mentioned some of the jokes and stereotypes, particularly around race and gender, that might feel dated or even offensive to audiences today.
I think that's a really important point. What might have been considered acceptable humor back in 1983 doesn't necessarily hold up today. As a society, we've become more aware of the power of representation and the harm that stereotypes can cause.
Does that mean we should just dismiss the entire film as problematic and move on?
I don't think so. I believe it's more about having a nuanced discussion. We can acknowledge that the film has its flaws while also appreciating its brilliance and its impact on filmmaking and social commentary. It's about understanding the context of the time it was made in while also being critical of the elements that haven't aged well.
It's like acknowledging that even our favorite works of art can have problematic aspects, and that's okay. It's not about erasing the past, but learning from it.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that art is a product of its time, and as times change, so do our perspectives. But even as our views evolve, there are certain truths about the human experience that remain timeless. And I think Trading Places, at its core, taps into some of those truths.
It's a reminder that great storytelling can transcend its time and continue to resonate with audiences even decades later. It makes me think about how a film like Trading Places might be made differently if it were released today.
That's a fascinating thought. How would a modern filmmaker tackle those same themes of class inequality and social mobility in a way that feels both relevant and sensitive to contemporary audiences? Would they focus on different aspects of the system, explore new forms of social division?
It's interesting to consider how the story might be updated while still retaining that core message about the impact of privilege and the potential for change. But even with its imperfections, Trading Places remains a classic for a reason. It's a film that continues to spark conversations, challenge our assumptions, and make us laugh along the way.
It reminds us that comedy can be a powerful tool for social commentary, and that even the most outrageous situations can hold a mirror up to our own realities.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Trading Places, I think the big takeaway is this. The film is more than just a hilarious 80s comedy. It's a film that invites us to think critically about social structures, the nature of success, and the ways in which our lives are shaped by forces both within and beyond our control.
And while the film may have its flaws, its commentary on wealth disparity and social injustice continues to resonate with audiences today. It encourages us to question the status quo and to consider the ways in which we can create a more equitable and just society. It really does.
I agree.
It makes you think.
Yeah.
And I think to kind of wrap up this deep dive into Trading Places,
Yeah.
I think it's worth kind of leaving you with this question. Given everything we've talked about, its brilliance, its flaws, its relevance, what aspects of Trading Places do you think would need to be updated if someone were to remake it today?
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
And it really challenges us to think about how societal values and humor have changed since the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certain jokes that might have been considered edgy or even acceptable back then would likely fall flat or even cause offense today.
Exactly. So, if a filmmaker were to tackle this story today, how would they navigate those tricky areas while still preserving the heart of the film's message? Would they focus on different forms of inequality? Maybe explore the impact of technology on social mobility?
It would be interesting to see how they'd handle those themes in a way that feels both fresh and relevant to modern audiences. Maybe they'd even flip the script entirely.
Oh.
Yeah.
Instead
of two guys trading places, perhaps it's two women from completely different backgrounds.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
It would certainly open up new avenues for exploring social dynamics and power structures. And it would be fascinating to see how that shift in perspective would impact the humor and the overall message of the film.
It's amazing to think about how a story like this could be reimagined for a new generation while still retaining that core element of social commentary. But one thing is for sure. Trading Places, even with its imperfections, has left a mark on cinematic history.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that comedy can be a powerful tool for sparking conversations about important social issues. And it shows us that even a film that's meant to be entertaining can also make us think critically about the world around us.
So as we conclude our deep dive, we encourage you to go back and watch Trading Places with a fresh perspective. Look beyond the laughs, consider the context, and engage with its complex themes.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, keep the conversation going.
Yes.
Because that's what this deep dive is all about. Sparking curiosity, digging beneath the surface, and coming away with new insights and perspectives to share with the world.
Exactly.
Until next time. Keep exploring.
Keep learning.
Keep those brains buzzing.
Absolutely. Okay.